r/Nosleep. Posted by u/MackMoyerAuthor. We found a strange child in the woods. He's my god now. Soon, he'll be yours, too. We found the girl and her child in the woods near Indian Point Park. It was an especially humid March morning and a heavy fog had set in. When he first cried out, we thought he was a bird. It was a high-pitched whistle that fell to a bellowing soprano. Mark looked back at me with the first traces of excitement I'd seen in him since we left Columbus for a week in the woods, a trip our counselor ordered, a sort of chemotherapy for marriage. Mark's hair was as shaggy as it had been in years, dirty blonde and thin at the scalp. A beard concealed his second chin. "It sounds like it's hurt," he said. I pulled my hair into a ponytail as we pushed through the mist. Sweat soaked into the roots of my hair and trickled down my neck. I couldn't wait to get back to the lake, open a bottle of wine, and kick off my boots. My feet were already blistered and we nearly walked right over them. The girl sat in the dirt cross-legged. She cradled the child in her lap. A fine brown fuzz covered his body. Though small, his arms were already thick with defined muscles, ending with 2 fingers and a thumb on each hand, mirrored by his 3-toed feet, with the tail whipping between his legs. A thin trunk hung from his face with a snout at the tip. His eyes stuck out the most. They were big, round, black, and innocent. He reached out for us and cooed. A familiar emptiness echoed in my lower abdomen, having stumbled upon mother and child. The girl was pretty, 20 at the oldest, with dark hair and pale skin under a slimy yellow parka. She shot us a feral scowl. "Don't touch him." "Rachel, let's go," Mark said. Instead I knelt before them. "We won't hurt you." She pulled the child tight. "I've heard that before," she said, baring yellow teeth that hadn't been brushed in weeks. The child squirmed between her legs. His right ankle was swollen. "He's hurt," I said. I pointed back the way we came. "I have supplies. I can help." Her scowl softened a little. Past her savage, mud-stained visage I saw the vulnerable young mother huddling behind the fierce matriarch. The child reached for me again. "May I?" I asked. I wasn't a mother, though I once came close. Perhaps the girl sensed that. She nodded tersely and I held out my finger. The child took it with surprising strength. He hooted. I turned to Mark, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. He put his hand on my shoulder. "He's a sweet little guy," Mark said. "What is he?" The girl offered us the smallest of grins. "He's a baby." The girl's name was Grady. She told us they ran into 2 hunters the previous evening. The child injured his ankle while they fled. "They saw him and just started shooting," she said, back at our tent. "They thought he was a monster." I watched Grady cradle the child and felt the echo in my belly again, reminding me of what brought us here. Soon after the miscarriage, our little private jokes stopped hitting the mark. Our date nights turned into silent marathons, both of us watching the clock over untouched glasses of wine. One night Mark got out of bed and said he slept better on the couch. I didn't argue. During our last counseling session, our shrink asked, "Has infidelity been an issue?" Mark shifted in his seat and chuckled. I did the same. "Of course not," I said. "You guys need to reconnect. Maybe a trip, just the 2 of you." I didn't know if it was a last resort, but it sure felt like it. "Is it broken?" Grady's voice shook me from the memory. "I'm sorry?" "His ankle." "No, just a sprain. Not a bad one, either. He should be fine in a day or 2. Mark brought my first aid bag in from the truck. I unzipped the pediatric pouch and retrieved a splint and a roll of gauze. The child whistled as I wrapped his injured ankle. Mark knelt next to us. "Does he have a name?" Mark asked, holding his finger out to the child. The child raised his snout and sniffed at Mark's fingertip. "Kai Tatin," Grady said. She pulled off her parka. Even with the recent warm weather I couldn't imagine her getting along comfortably in her torn sweatpants and small undershirt. I waited for Mark to inspect her curves, the hint of cleavage just below the neck of her shirt, but to my surprise he didn't. "What does his name mean?" I asked as I tightened the splint. "I'm not sure. I'll know more about him when I get him home." There was a hopeless tinge to her voice, a sadness. "Home isn't very close," I said. She shook her head. "South Mountain, Pennsylvania. We'll get there, though." I looked at Mark. He smirked. I did, too. "We can take you," I said. A steady rain beating against the tent woke me. Mark lay asleep in his bed on the other side of the tent. The front tent flap blew open, unzipped, bringing rain and an icy wind with it. Lightning flashed, and in that instant I saw that Grady's sleeping bag was empty. As the flash faded and thunder followed, I saw the child standing on my bed, between my legs. "Kaitatin?" I whispered. "Are you okay?" The child squeaked and took a step toward me. He tumbled on his sprained ankle. I caught him. "Let's go find your mom," I told him. He purred and wrapped his legs around my hips as I scooped him up. I shivered at the wind's cold bite. The child sniffed at my midsection with his snout, tickling me. His tiny mouth danced up between my breasts. I shrieked when his lips found the outline of my left nipple. "No," I said. He recoiled and a small sad voice fluttered out of him. He hugged himself and pouted. "It's okay," I said. "You just can't do that." Raindrops pummeled me as I poked my head through the tent flap. "What are you doing to him?" I fell back into the tent and went down hard on my tailbone. Grady stood naked before me. Her breasts were enlarged, dripping milk. "He woke me," I said, collecting myself. He was crying. Grady plucked the child from my grasp. He shot his mouth to her nipple. "I'm sorry," Grady said. She knelt with the child at her chest and gave me her hand. I refused. "I'm okay, take care of your baby," I said. "It's cold. Let me give you a blanket." "I have one in my sleeping bag," she said. "No," I responded. She'd need to keep warm later and getting her blanket wet wouldn't do. I took mine from my bed and gave it to her. "Here." I wrapped the comforter around Grady and the child. "Thank you," Grady said. She took the baby out into the rain and beyond the trees while Kaitatin sucked eagerly at her breast. Mark stirred as I returned to bed. I lay with my knees curled to my chest and shivered. Mark got up and pulled his blanket behind him. He laid it over me. I took his hand and pulled him close. He slid under the blanket with me. We slept in the same bed for the first time in months. The next morning was gray and cold. Grady was eager to leave. We planned to take I-80 eastbound over the Ohio border into Pennsylvania, but over breakfast I realized a problem. "Rush hour traffic," I said as I munched on a biscuit. "What about it?" Mark asked. I nodded toward the child. He was sleeping next to Grady. "There'll be prying eyes if we get caught in gridlock." "We can take the back roads," Grady said. "We'd still risk the child being seen. But I have an idea." Mark and I left them in the tent as we headed to a town a few miles out. We wouldn't take long and Grady had no intention of leaving the tent with Kaitatin. I doubted anyone would hassle them. There was a department store in town. We went inside. As we came to the toddlers section I felt the empty pangs in my belly. Mark's hand found mine. I closed my fingers around it. "There," I said. I found a pink hooded winter coat with matching pants. They'd fit the child well, with enough room to tuck his snout behind the zipper. No, Mark said. "We can't dress our boy in pink." I laughed. "Let's see if we can find it in blue." We found the tent flap torn open when we returned. The cooler had spilled, the food inside either missing or strewn about the floor. Mark noticed the blood. It was smeared along his bed then continued in a zigzag line toward the opening. "Where'd they go?" I asked. Mark ran outside. "Grady?" I followed him. An animal howled somewhere to the north. We hurried toward it. A trail of blood led our way. We found the child beyond some bushes. He was tearing the innards out of a large black bear. The bear clung to life but lost hold quickly, panting as the child dug his snout into its chest, his hand snapping the animal's ribcage then flinging out its guts. The bear gasped and died. Kaitatin climbed atop the bear's chest and roared in equal parts triumph and sorrow. Mark backed away and covered his mouth. I took the child in my arms. He whined sadly as I wiped the gore from his snout, the bear's hairy flesh from his hands. "Maybe you shouldn't hold him," Mark said. "He won't hurt me." I found Grady's body a short distance away. I tried handing the child to Mark. He wouldn't take him. "He won't hurt you, either." Mark tried not to tremble as he took Kaitatin. The bear must have gotten into the tent then taken a swipe at her throat. I checked for a pulse, though I knew I wouldn't find one. Blood pooled in the leaves under her. The bear nicked her carotid artery. She'd bled to death fleeing from the bear. Mark handed the child back to me the first chance he got. "We should call the police," he said. "No. Grady's dead." I glared at him. "What do you think will happen if the authorities see the child?" Mark swallowed. "They'll take him." "We're going to keep our promise to Grady," I said. "We're taking him home." I dressed the child in the blue jacket and sweatpants before we left. He protested when I tucked his snout under the zipper, but once we were in the truck he quieted down. I sat in the back seat with the child as Mark navigated back to the road. "Don't you think we should have buried her?" Mark asked. "The soil was frozen," I answered. "It would have taken us hours." We returned to the highway and Mark slammed on the accelerator. His eyes kept dancing in the rearview mirror, as if he expected someone to catch us. "Slow down," I said. "If we get pulled over." "I know," Mark snapped. "I just want to get this over with." The child let out a quiet growl. I rubbed his back to calm him. Pellets of freezing rain pattered against the windshield as we crossed into Pennsylvania. Within an hour the blacktop was coated in ice. Mark struggled to keep the truck on the road. "Pull off at the next exit," I said. "I can make it." "Mark, this is dangerous. Now pull off." The truck spun into a violent fishtail only a moment later. Begrudgingly, Mark took the next exit. "What now?" he barked. "We can't take him to a fucking hotel." "No," I said. As we rolled off the highway I spotted a sign for Allegheny National Forest. "We'll camp out tonight and make the rest of the way tomorrow." I awoke in a dark room lit by a single oil lamp. The room stunk like rotted wood and horse shit. My stomach ached, my womanhood felt like it was going to split in two. My face was hot, slick with sweat, and I screamed with a voice that was not my own. I lay on my back, naked below the waist. My breasts were oversized, my belly was near bursting. Something moved under there, kicking, clawing. 6 hooded figures stood around me. Their robes shone dark red in the lantern light. They clasped their hands together in silent prayer, their eyes all fixated on my womb. "Please stop this," I cried, with the voices of 100 women. "Please." I recognized one of the voices. Grady's, mixed with mine and the others. The robed figures ignored our cry. They broke into an incantation in an alien tongue. They started quietly but their voices rose with each verse. Pain racked my lower half. I screamed when I saw the snout emerge between my legs, bloody and slick, snapping back and forth against my thighs. I pushed. The head came now, with its big round eyes, my child, covered in mucus. Then the lantern light vanished along with the figures in red and I stood alone in the woods, naked, with the light rain falling upon me. Moonlight broke through the clouds. The child watched me. I opened my arms to him. He started tentatively, unsure, likely yearning for his old mother. "I know you miss her," I said. "But I'll try my best." The child chirped. Somehow, I understood him. "You're hungry," I said. I beckoned him to my breasts. They were swollen and lactating. He climbed into my arms and fed. I sat down in the mud as he drank. His mouth was eager, but not so much that he hurt me. Mark called my name. "Rachel?" I clutched the child tight to my chest. Mark couldn't know. He wouldn't understand. Then the child fixed his big black eyes on me and cooed. His voice soothed me, yet he sounded determined as well. At once I knew what he meant to do. Though I had become the child's mother, Mark would never be his father. A ball rose in my throat though I did my best to choke it down. "Is there no other way?" I asked. The child brushed his finger along my cheek and I knew there wasn't. "Rachel?" Mark called out from the dark. I kissed the child. "Go then." Kaitadin raced into the shadows. "Rachel?" Mark said again. "Are you?" His voice was cut off. The child worked quickly, mercifully. I was crying when the child returned. Yet when he curled in my lap and resumed drinking from my breast I didn't know if those tears came from grief or elation. A string of foreign words escaped my lips. Though I couldn't comprehend them individually, their meaning struck me at once. Rise, cleanse, purify. A heavy snow began to fall halfway through our journey but by mid-afternoon we came upon a small, handsome city dotted with single homes and duplexes on the north side, punctuated with silent blast furnaces from a dormant steel mill bordering a small river that split the city in two. On the other side of the river there were row houses in shambles that crammed narrow streets that snaked up the mountainside. "That's it," I gasped. Though I'd never seen South Mountain before, its bare trees and snow-lined hills reaching up to the clouds felt like home. The child hooted in the passenger seat. I held his hand and drove on. The child led me up the frozen path as daylight bled above us. Kaitadin walked briskly despite his splinted ankle, bopping along in snow that reached his waist. I couldn't help but laugh at him. We came to a rock wall with a narrow archway chiseled into the stone. 6 solemn figures in red robes emerged, all of whom I recognized. The tallest one dropped to one knee to welcome us, his smile visible under his cowl. The tall man pulled his hood back as we approached. He had ghostly, weathered features with frost-white hair. "We are the gatekeepers," he said. He enunciated each word carefully. "And we have been waiting for you." The other gatekeepers were much shorter and slight of build. Even the tall man, though he stood a full head over me, had a body bordering on malnourished. Their skin clung desperately to their faces, as if stretched too thin, yet their smiles were warm. 2 other gatekeepers were as pale as the tall man, though the other 3 were several shades darker. Of those, one wore his hair long, the other in a mohawk, and the third with feathers. I undressed the child. "I had to dress him," I said, "to keep him hidden." "We knew he was in capable hands," the tall man said. The tall man pulled his cowl back into place. A heavy iron door shrieked on its hinges as it opened. Down inside there was darkness broken by twinkling firelight. The tall man took my hand. "Follow me." The door closed behind us. We followed the rest of the party. The walls were built with smooth obsidian, black, glowing orange from the torches. The child grunted. I unzipped my coat and gave him my breast. The ceiling began to drip water the farther we descended. "Are we under the river?" I asked. "Partly," the tall man answered. "These caverns run parallel to the water." The passageway came to an end with a tall door built from bones, chalk white, with a skull at the knob. The lead gatekeeper reached between the skull's teeth, found a handle, and pushed it open. Beyond the door, a dark yawning chasm stretched before us. Here the river water pooled on the floor past my ankles. The lead gatekeeper lit a torch and we followed the lonely fire deeper inside. After a half-mile or so, our party stopped. The lead gatekeeper shined his torch on a large iron pot steaming with oil. He dipped his flame into it and a fearsome tongue burst out, catching on wicks dangling from the unseen ceiling above. The flames raced up the wicks. Countless other dangling, inert winding ropes caught fire and illuminated the abyss. Beneath my feet the floor was made of thick glass, and under it I saw the faint outlines of something large and round. The tall man kissed my cheek. They chanted in their alien tongue and I along with them. "Rise, cleanse, purify." We drew into a circle beneath the fires, and below the glass a yellow pupil opened in the mammoth black eye. I chanted louder as I drew the child close. "It's time," I told him, weeping. The child responded with a melancholic hoot. I looked back and took in the true distance of the chasm. The waters drained into holes along the pane glass that housed the soulless husk below us. In the distance I could only make out certain features, but at my feet I recognized the child's face, even the beginnings of his trunk several yards away, his snout thicker than a dozen tree trunks lined side by side. I wept. The child held me tighter. I looked to the tall man. "Will we survive? If we move quickly enough, yes. The cask will not hold for long, but the awakening takes some time." He straightened his shoulders and gave me a dignified smile. "You will see your child awaken. My child." There had been another in my belly, once. Hadn't there? I struggled to remember. I recalled feeling empty, but couldn't say why. There had been a man, fat and bald, with a big smile, and there had been laughter as well, with glasses of wine over dinner, but that was gone. I didn't care. I had my child. "Go," I said to him, and kissed his snout. The tall man and I rejoined the chant as the child leapt from my arms and splashed through the water. The floor opened by the head of the behemoth. Kaitadian jumped inside. The yellow eye bulged and the world groaned. Our chant, never ceasing, was swallowed by the thunder. I cried out, aching in ecstasy, even as blood spurted from my left ear. 7 horses appeared. They'd been flayed from the neck down and their exposed muscle and viscera wept blood. The gatekeepers mounted. The tall man got on last, after helping me onto mine. "Let us ride now, Mother of God." Dusk set in as our mounts spirited us south, with the mountain in full view behind us. Drivers on the road skidded to a halt as they gaped at us. They didn't concern me. Neither did the state police, who eventually followed us with their lights flashing. Though the gatekeepers stopped their chant, I hadn't. Grady and I along with the rest would not stop, no matter how badly our lungs burned, until our child was born again. Rise. Cleanse. Purify. We stopped 10 miles out. The police officers exited their vehicles slowly, guns drawn, focused more on our steeds rather than us. The tall gatekeeper took my hand as we turned toward the mountain. The mountain cried out. The police turned to it, as did the rubbernecking drivers. Townspeople scurried out of their hovels as the world moved 10 miles north. I dismounted from my horse and dropped to my knees. An avalanche of debris, earth, and rock spilled down the mountain's face, crushed the tokens in its path, and caused a momentary nuclear winter. Then behind the veil of dust, lording over the purification at his feet, shaking the planet, Kaidatin rose. The purification of the town was explained, by the authorities, as a massive gas explosion. Everyone who survived, all those who witnessed him rising up from the molten guts of the earth, now pledge fealty to him. We are one family, united by my boy. Now, he is at rest again, for he's still a young child. I assure you all, he will be waking again sometime soon.